They want to feel like they can have a two-sided, not a one-sided negotiation over these issues, and they don't want to feel threatened by the US.
Well, China is, on the one hand, obviously having to take a more assertive posturing against US escalation. China is also essentially appealing to the rest of the world.
Trump believes China has badly cheated the United States. He accuses China of flooding world markets with unfairly subsidized cheap goods, which wreaks havoc on a country's ability to manufacture and provide for itself because they just can't compete.
As long as this trade remains unbalanced, I think the threat or the potentiality for additional tariffs will be there.
And you recall that chart we showed you earlier about how much more the U.S. buys from China than it sells to China, the U.S. running a trade deficit of nearly $300 billion. Trump sees that as proof that China must be ripping the U.S. off.
Trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life.
But every expert we've ever talked to on the subject says that's entirely the wrong way to look at it.
There's nothing inherently good or bad about a trade surplus or a deficit. The United States has had a trade deficit pretty much since the end of the Second World War. Why is that? Because they're richer than any other country, so they buy more stuff.
Just to use an analogy, they're like we as households, we as consumers, we have trade surpluses and trade deficits with different entities in the economy. Most of us run a massive trade deficit with our grocery store. Most of us have a massive trade surplus with our employer. They pay us, but we don't buy anything from them. Are these things that are problems that we need to remedy? So in some sense, the underlying premise that bilateral trade imbalances are necessarily bad is just wrong.
But what makes interpreting what Trump truly wants from any fight he picks really difficult is that his goals are sometimes self-contradicting. For example, on the one hand, he claims to love tariffs, like the ones imposed on China, because of all the revenue raised by charging the American companies who pay those tariffs.
We're going to start being very wealthy again. We're going to be wealthy as a country because they've taken so much of our wealth away from us.
But he also claims the purpose of tariffs is to do the exact opposite, which is to convince enough American companies not to pay them and instead bring manufacturing back to America.
Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers.
And then other times, he seems to see tariffs simply as a club with which he can beat his opponents to extract concessions on things that have nothing to do with trade at all, like the push to get the Chinese company behind TikTok to sell its US operations to an American buyer. Quote, maybe I'll give them a little reduction in tariffs or something to get it done.
It's very tricky, and it's not clear that there is a grand bargain that could be struck that would put US-China relations on a stable footing, which means both sides could end up disappointed.
Because they don't know exactly what to prepare for, they have to prepare for everything.
But what is unavoidably clear is that while Trump is in no way the original source of friction between the US and China, I mean, this has been an adversarial relationship for a long, long time. Trump has picked a trade fight with perhaps the one country in the world best able to stand up for itself.
The U.S.-China bilateral relationship commercially comes to a halt, which we're on the precipice of doing. That is going to be sand in the gears of the global economy altogether.
It is hard to overstate how damaging and risky this is. It's this incredible shock treatment that could well kill the patient.
The US and China are respectively the world's #1 and #2 economic superpowers.